of the Access to Justice Board, and you're welcome to the March 2022 meeting of the Access to Justice Board. Thank you for coming, and please, if this is your first time of joining this meeting, please indicate in chats and let people welcome you. We would appreciate that. We still have a ton of people trying to log in, so I would wait. But I think we do have a quorum. Diana, could you help me check? I think we have all the board member back.
Yes.
Okay.
I have a quorum.
All right. While we are waiting for others to join, we have circulated the minutes of last month's meeting ahead of time. Does anyone have any discussions, amendments to the minutes, clarifications? In the absence of that, a motion to adopt the minutes? Thank you. So moved. Second? Second, SP? Thank you. All right. All in favor, aye? All right. Unanimous. Thank you. All right. Today, we wanted to focus on one or two issues that is very, very important to civil legal aid, and that is the challenge of having attorneys in small town and rural areas in Washington. So we have invited the WISBA committee chair and members of that committee to kind of provide an overview for us on the challenge and what they are working on. So today, join me in welcoming my two besties, Murph Hammond, as well as Governor Hunter Abel. Please join me to welcome them. Over to you, Murph and Hunter.
All right, well, thank you, Francis. Good morning, everyone. What a pleasure it is to be here. I see a lot of familiar faces. Judge Corbett, Your Honor, good to see you again. Esperanza Barboa. I had the pleasure of serving with Esperanza a couple of years ago. Cindy, of course, who's working with us on the STAR committee. I'm joined by Murph, and I apologize if I'm missing anybody else. I've got this tile issue up on my screen where I can't see everyone. My name is Hunter Abel. I serve as chair of the Small Town and Rural Committee for the Washington State Bar Association. This is a new committee established by the Bar Association. I serve on it with Murph, and we're here to talk to you, just briefly talk with you briefly today, a little bit about who we are, what we're doing, and how it overlaps and dovetails with the wonderful work that the Access to Justice Board is doing as well. So the backdrop on this is that there's increasing recognition nationwide of the legal challenges facing those who live in what is called legal deserts throughout the nation. These are areas where there are increasingly few attorneys for increasingly large numbers of the public. Significant areas of the country that are where for many people, the ability to interact with and seek counsel from an attorney is increasingly or prohibitively difficult. We have our own areas of legal deserts here in Washington. The Board of Governors recognizes this issue. There's an increasingly large amount of literature on this issue, both from the ABA and from other organizations throughout the nation. And the Board of Governors, to its credit, said this is something that's going to require sustained focus and attention to address by the WSBA. So last year, after a year-long project that was called the Rural Practice Project, led by the WSBA, where we engaged in talking with a lot of stakeholders throughout the state, the WSBA established the Small Town and Rural Committee, comprising of practitioners throughout the state, as well as representatives from various stakeholder groups. So where we are now is we have had several meetings. We are in the process of considering a number of different proposals and ideas about how to address these issues. And I will say that these are complicated issues. I don't think there's any one-size-fits-all solution to the issues of the declining availability of legal services in small town and rural areas. I think there is recognition that there are financial considerations, there are cultural considerations, there are education considerations at work here, and then just kind of the desires of particularly younger practitioners. For just being perfectly candid, if a lot of younger practitioners are asked and they say they've got the choice of practicing in Davenport or practicing in Seattle, a lot of them are going to say they prefer Seattle. And so those are some of the issues that we are addressing. At this time, I'm going to turn it over to Murph to talk a little bit about what is happening with the rest of the committee and kind of where we go forward from here.
Thanks, Hunter. That was a great overview. So my role on the committee is I'm the civil legal aid representative. So there is a representative from different places. And so wanted to connect with all of you if you had input or ideas about the rural urban divide in civil legal aid. I know that Francis does not like the term legal desert, so I won't say it, Francis, because I know that folks in rural communities feel like folks outside those communities make judgments and form ideas that aren't necessarily accurate. So there's been a lot of work historically about how to connect and provide legal aid to folks in rural areas and small towns. And we have challenges at Columbia Legal, and I know other organizations throughout the state, of hiring staff in legal areas, of maintaining staff in legal areas and small town and rural areas. That has been a huge issue. Creating pipelines has been challenging. And also making sure that folks get the same service in a rural area as they would get in an urban area. And looking at where are the concentration of services and how we think about that. And it has been this ongoing challenge for several decades. And I know that lots of folks have worked on it in different ways. So this is the next iteration of how do we do this? And so I see my role as connecting the work of the DISCO Delivery of Legal Services subcommittee of this group with the committee and doing some work in that subcommittee and bringing that to the STAR committee. There are several subcommittees. Right now I'm on the pipeline committee, but the subcommittees could change. I think we're in flux because we're a brand new committee, and the law schools are very present. Cindy's also a representative and on the STAR committee. So that's our focus. We're really looking at, is there a way, I think one of the big things is to folks who live and work in rural areas and small towns and want to become lawyers, that they can stay in that area to become lawyers or return to that area, that there are sufficient supports and avenues to be able to do that. So there are many much research that's already been done. There's a long, huge Excel sheet that looks at every state and what kind of support they have for rural practice, from loan repayment programs to summer internships to fellowships to specific law school programs, cohorts, mentorship, all of those kinds of things. And so the committee is looking at all of those, looking at different proposals of what might work best in Washington, what's worked well in other states, and what might be replicable, what we can replace and do here. So I'll open it up if there are any questions.
Any question, comment, or clarification? SP, go ahead.
Yeah. Boy, this is a big job. And this is an issue that has been around forever, right? That the divide that those mountains create. And I think about the one of the issues is, and how is this committee addressing or talking about the issue of the inadequate funding that the east of the mountains receives? And that has a lot to do with why money always is an issue, right? And the feeling from folks on the east side that the west side gets everything, right? King County gets everything. You get all the lawyers, you get all the money, You get all the perks. And so I'm glad that you mentioned some of the incentives, Murph, that are being created to try to encourage people to stay in the area or come back to the area. What can, I'm thinking, what can we do? I mean, you have urban folks that maybe have never lived in a rural area. Are we also looking at seeing if, some attorneys that are over here in Seattle or in other parts of King County, Thurston County, Snohomish County might be willing to relocate? And what kind of plans are you putting in place to entice and encourage people to do that? And then also in that, how are you also dealing with the cultural thing, right? Because you bring folks over there that there's a lot of Latinos, there's a huge Latino population out there. There's Native American, African American. And so what work is being done to make sure that the people that do go out there, if they're not from those communities, that they are prepared to be able to serve those communities in a way that is effective. So a lot of questions, just because this has been on my mind for a long time when I was doing farm worker work over there and working with farm workers, and a lot of the issues they had were legal issues around pay, around, being exposed to pesticides and what have you. So, yeah.
Well, I might dive in just with a quick comment, and then maybe Murph, if you have any comments as well. I would say with in response to that, Esperanza, those are all issues that we are thinking about and grappling with. You're right; these are big issues, big questions. They've been around for a long time. I will say that we've got a number of subcommittees that are up and running within our overall committee, and one of the subcommittees is looking at this question of a pipeline to help bring practitioners into rural areas. There's also been discussion from one of our committee members about trying to increase the visibility and frankly the attractiveness of rural practices throughout the rest of the state. So for example, currently WISBA will provide low or no cost advertising for certain government positions. And there's been discussion about maybe trying to provide similar subsidized advertising for rural practices to help ensure that there is continued availability for people who live in that area to receive legal services. And then also trying to educate kind of the broader membership of the bar really about the attractiveness of a rural practice. And we've got one of our committee members who, as a fairly young attorney, was elected as a county prosecuting attorney, is currently dual-hatted as the county prosecuting attorney and the coroner. So she kind of describes her life as, a little bit of, a bit of CSI, a little bit of courtroom drama. There's a real opportunity for her to take a leadership position in the community. So I think those are some things that we're frankly grappling with. We don't pretend to have answers at this point. We're still fairly new, but I think we're making good progress. And then one other piece that I would say, Esperanza, is you made a very, I think, a wise observation about how the mountains are real in our state. I mean, they do cause a divide, but one of the things that we are also exploring is this concept of geographic diversity and how being a small town and rural practitioner in different areas of the state may look very different. So for example, if you are practicing out on the Olympic Peninsula in a small town, you may be the only lawyer out there, but your experience will have some commonalities, but also some differences from the lawyer who practices in a small town out on the Palouse. So I think those are real interesting things for this committee to address and resolve. So those are some of my thoughts. Murph, have I missed anything, left anything on the table?
Okay, Diana, Church, Judge Kovitz.
Yeah, I just had a couple quick questions. One is first I should say I'm really excited about this project and everybody involved. And so my two questions are, one, is there any work being done to bring perspectives from the client communities in those areas? I don't know if there's folks on STAR to bring that perspective, because I'm understanding you have attorneys or legal professionals who work in small town and rural areas, but I wasn't sure about client communities. So that was one question. And then completely unrelated, I'm wondering if the scope of the committee is also considering technology. Of course, it's not the answer to everything, but if there's a work group or subcommittee looking at how we can use technology. So
First, I would say as far as the makeup of the committee is set by the WSBA. And so they did not have a community member as a particular spot on there. There are general members and folks had to apply to be on the committee. So I think it works the same way as most of the other committees. And I think as a committee, that's a recommendation that we could make in the future, is to make sure that there is a community member presence on the committee. As far as your second question around technology, I think we do have a subcommittee on that, Hunter, is that right?
Yeah, I would just echo those comments. You know, it's interesting because we're kind of a new experiment. And so that makes it a lot of fun for us. We're doing some things right, we're doing some things wrong, and we're learning as we go. I will say that I think there's been a pretty deliberate effort to recruit outside interest in the committee, even if someone is not a committee member. And we've got a pretty loyal cohort of folks who are attending our meetings regularly, even though they're not members. We do have some non-WSBA members who have been attending, which has been helpful for us. It might be something for us to look at in the future of just trying to go out and get community public representatives. The technology piece is really interesting. I think we've all observed that there, as horrific as the pandemic has been, there have been some marginal gains within the profession as far as technology is concerned. And maybe that is nowhere more, at least in my opinion, nowhere more apparent than way out in small town and rural areas. You know, I grew up in Fiore County. In that county, it's a big county. The county seat is a long ways away. If you've got people who have jury duty in Republic, but they live in Inchelium, or a hearing in Republic, but they live in Inchelium, that's going to be an hour and a half one way to get there. And now they're able to do that online. That's a big advantage for individuals who live in rural areas. So there is, I think technology is part of the answer, and it's something that we're looking at very closely.
Right, Judge?
I just wanted to echo what SB said regarding cultural competency, right? We need to make sure that we have that. And then I'm wondering if you've looked at some of the projects that are already happening. So in LCYC, which is Legal Counsel for Youth and Children, we represent youth virtually across the state. And that's because we know we can't get there. And it may work for our demographic because we have young people and they're more tech savvy. But we file virtually, we appear virtually in a lot of places. And then another thing is that we also have a couple of attorneys in small counties, and they were brand new attorneys. And so we invested in supervising them very closely in order to bring them up to speed so that they can now work within their communities, within those communities. One was a homegrown one and one was a transplant. So to some extent is investing in new attorneys to go to some of these places is also another thing to look at. And what does it take? And the partnerships you need to have in those rural communities, because we can't tell them how to do it in that community. We have to have other community members help us. So I'm happy to talk more about what we've done, but we could have 4 virtual lawyers right now, and we have the ability to have one, and we're probably going to lose the funding for that one.
So
Thank you, Chad. Okay, go ahead.
Sorry, Francis. I was just going to say, I think you're hitting the nail on the head. The need for partnerships, the need to have your ear to the ground in these communities is incredibly important because, again, these communities are different from each other. The needs in those communities are different. And what we also have been discussing, and what we think is true, is that if we are successful in sending out attorneys into small town and rural areas, but they don't have support already in those areas, and it's going to be a challenge, and they may not succeed. They may not make it there. And so we're trying to think about what will help address the need and have staying power. On the point of partnerships, I do really want to make sure I give credit where credit is due, because I think the idea of this small town and rural committee within the Bar Association was the culmination of a lot of different ideas that existed in different organizations kind of all around the same time. And the Washington Young Lawyers Division has been doing significant work on this for some time. and they've been instrumental both in the Rural Practice Project and in ramping up the STAR Committee. I was not familiar with LCYC and the program that you just mentioned, so I'm intrigued to hear that, because I think that addresses a lot of the issues that we're talking about. Thank you.
Thank you, Hunter. Judge Corbett?
3 quick comments. Having taught law school completely by Zoom and finding that it worked, I approached one law school and I didn't get much response on this, is that some lawyers grow where they're planted. And by that, I mean, if they go to law school in Spokane, they take a job in Spokane. If they go to law school in Seattle, they take a job in Seattle. We have lawyers in Spokane and Seattle. But there are single parents in the Tri-Cities and in Republic and in other areas in Southern King County down by Enumclaw, where there's not enough lawyers to do this. I would encourage the committee, and I'm happy to participate in this if you want me, is to encourage the law schools to expand their admission process to take in students that may not be able to travel to the law school. It's a long ways to get from the Tri-Cities to Spokane, and a single father or single mother can't leave their kids to go to law school in Spokane, but they may be able to take classes in those cities. And if they become a lawyer in that city, we have, and that's the same for Republic or someplace else. And I know it works to be able to teach the course by Zoom. And it actually increases the pool of great candidates the law schools could admit, both geographical diversity, ethnic diversity, and lots of diversity, without lowering LSAT scores or lowering their rankings of the school. Another piece that's similar to that, the second point that I'd like you to consider in doing this, is not just it is the apprenticeship. I'm not sure what we call it. Do we call it the Law Clerk Program or the apprenticeship program? That's something we don't push enough, that we can get lawyers, in smaller communities because they can't afford to come to Spokane or Seattle to go to law school. That's a great program. And I've seen a lot of those people that have gone through that have, I don't know why the correlation is high, but there's a high correlation between those people giving back to their communities, higher than people that have just gone through law school. So I think that's important. The third thing, I think I've sat on committees with Murph back when I was at NJP. I worked really hard to try to work on this technology issue. I'm not a technological expert, but we worked with local libraries in places where they could set up, computers, and Zoom and things have gotten so much better that if the lawyer is sitting at a debt clinic in Seattle helping someone near Enumclaw, they can go through those issues and provide legal services via Zoom. We just need sort of portals for people to be able to go where they don't have the computer access. And, we were able to accomplish that in a few cases, but I've seen it sort of dropped off. Some of you may have seen my short letter to the bar news about let's use Zoom and those tools that we've developed over the last couple of years where they're useful. And I think they really are a huge tool for access to justice, people that can't travel for law school for existing lawyers. Those are my thoughts. Murph, Hunter, I know you both. I really appreciate what you're doing. If I can help, just let me know.
Thank you, Judge Corbett. Jim Brumberger states in chat, push down law school approaches to licensing Law Clerk Program as an example. Cindy, if it's 1 minute, we're out of time, but I'll give you 1 minute to go ahead and make your input. Thank you.
Thank you. I just wanted to respond really briefly to some of the comments. So I sit on the pipeline subcommittee with Murph, and we are considering all options that other states and programs are doing in terms of rural outreach. In fact, yesterday I had a call with Montana Legal Services and their rural incubator project for lawyers program called Ripple. And they actually just pointed me to a brand new article in the Wyoming Law Review about saving the lawyers in rural practice. And so that's probably something I'm going to circulate with our larger committee. And Seattle U in the fall just started our first Flex JD program, which is fully online. And we have students from all over participating in this JD program. And interestingly enough, admissions overall for law schools are down this year, but our Flex JD program admission is up, I think, 50%. So that really goes to your point of trying to recruit people from, outside of the big cities to attend law school. I think there's definitely a movement there. And so I think that's why, and all the law schools are represented on the STAR committee. I think that's a really important part or point that I want to make. So there is broad representation, but I think we're all invested to figuring out how we can improve this situation in rural areas. So that's all. That was a minute.
Thank you. I need to get Hunter back to the Supreme Court meeting, the Board of Governors Supreme Court meeting. Any closing comments, Hunter and Murph, before we wrap it?
Francis, I just want to thank you for the opportunity to be here. I want to thank you, everyone on this call, for what you're doing for access to justice and for our profession. If anyone is interested in follow-up discussions on this, you know how to reach me. I'm easily found on the WISBA directory, or Francis can point you, or Murph can point you in the right direction to me. But I think there's a lot of overlap here. There's a lot of synergy, I think, between what's happening in the Small Town Rural Committee and what's happening in other parts of the WSBA. But thank you for what you're doing. I hope you have a great rest of your meeting, and thank you so much for the opportunity to be here.
Thank you. All right. We're going to transition to Antonio Ginata for legislative updates. Here you go, Antonio.
Thank you, Francis. And I definitely want to hear from Jim as well here. I think Jim captures a lot of the money issues better than I do, but session was over, 60-day session, ended last night at 11:30 p.m. How the session went sort of just depends on who you ask. I mean, I think some people will say it was transformational and some people say it was a massive disappointment. And I think it's a little bit of both. Just depends on what issue. I just want to run through the good stuff, the bad stuff, and then just a quick what's next. See if I can do it in 7 minutes. We walked in with a narrow set of priorities, recognizing it was going to be a difficult year. But one of the things that was funded that we're incredibly excited about is the Health Equity for Immigrants funding. So this is a program that provides healthcare coverage for immigrants regardless of immigration status. For low-income immigrants, so a Medicaid equivalent program for up to 138% of the federal poverty level, and access to the exchange for people up to 250% of the federal poverty level. It's that's transformational and really incredibly helpful in systemic reform, and it's good to see the legislature fund that. We've talked about a couple of these things in prior meetings. The issue of allowing for compensation for boards. For people with lived experience who are participating boards and commissions. The bill got weak, and just like every bill gets weak in the legislature, now it's sort of agencies may provide stipends to people with lived experiences if it promotes equity. But opening that door, I think, will change. And I think there'll be a lot of pressure on agencies to provide those stipends. And those stipends can include money to provide childcare services. So it's a good way to, I think, to improve representation and increase the number of people with lived experience on state boards and commissions and other types of those bodies. It's nice to see that. We've talked about the Community Reinvestment Fund. That bill didn't pass, but it did get funded in the budget. So that's a lot. That's $200 million, and some of that can go to reentry services and to civil legal assistance for people who need post-conviction assistance, who need help with vacating their cases or expunging their convictions. So it's nice to see that. Jim, maybe you can talk about, I think there's more money for civil legal assistance for people who were impacted by the Blake decision. We had some good anti-poverty bills pass. DSHS shut down all of its offices and told everybody to go to the phones, and it was really keeping people from accessing their benefits. And so there was a bill 2075 that set some minimum standards for DSHS that was really helpful. There's a study in the budget to look at baby bonds, which I think is a good way to look at to try to address wealth inequities. And we at CLS helped to push a bill that would allow for some good cause exceptions for people who were late to request a hearing for public benefits assistance. We also helped to pass a bill 1412 that reforms LFOs. legal financial obligations. But like that's the half full. The half empty is at the last minute, that bill was really gutted and gutted in a way that we were actually quite surprised. It would take too long to get into, but it's a much smaller bill than we expected it to be. And that happened a lot. Really, in the world of criminal legal system reforms, it all died. Everything died. Post-conviction review died. The sentencing enhancements died. Across the board, earned release never even got a hearing, juvenile points. I mean, just a bad world. And I think a lot of that shaped by concerns about November. It's an election year. And so all those things, they went away. I mean, I feel bad for the tenant protection advocates. I mean, there is more money for civil legal aid for folks who are at risk of eviction, but there was a good bill that Representative Peterson put out there that would have required a greater notice if your rent was suddenly increased by a large amount. The rent gouging bill 1904, that didn't make it. Big environmental priorities died at the end of, at the last minute. I think it's House Bill 1099 that had to do with the Growth Management Act and building in climate change as an issue related that you needed to look at when you got into comprehensive planning. That bill in the last 24 hours, it was alive, it was dead, it was alive, and then it was dead again. And so I feel bad for the enviros. Labor priorities died, safe and healthy. Nurse staffing died, ergonomics died. I mean, it was tough. So it just depends on who you ask. As to what's next, I've mentioned the elections. I don't know if you've opened your mail today at home, but if you're probably already getting fundraising requests now that the session is over and the freeze is over. There's a lot of shifts next year. We're losing 2 chairs, and good allies. Representative Sells in House Labor is retiring. Representative Kirby, who chaired Consumer Protection, is retiring. Lots of senators are retiring. David Frog, Ruben Carlisle, Sharon Brown, Tim Sheldon are all retiring. Lori Dolan retired in the House, as did surprisingly Jesse Johnson, who just started just a couple of years ago and was really leading a lot of the efforts around police reform. And there's still talk of more turnover to come, so it should be an interesting interim and election season, and then moving on to 2023. So that's my very rapid update. Jim, can you talk Oakland stuff?
Sure. I don't know, Francis, if this is the time or later, but there's a couple of things I want to talk about relative to the policy work. There was, Antonio mentioned House Bill 1905, the anti-gouging bill. There was also a cleanup bill on Senate Bill 5160. It was Senate Bill 5576 that passed out of committee, could not get out of rules and died. It would have fixed a lot of technical problems with the bill. It was not a substantive bill with one exception, but nevertheless, kind of the moderate Senate Ds killed it. The community reinvestment funding is essentially a short-term replacement for what we had hoped would happen had House Bill 1827 passed. That passed the House. It was in rules in the Senate, but we could not get it out. And the governor's office, this is a governor's office initiative in partnership with Representative Melanie Morgan and Senator Rebecca Saldana. Even with the governor pushing really hard on it, he couldn't get it out, but it does show up in the budget, in the commerce section of the budget. And we have been working with the governor's team, with our colleagues at OPD, and with Kate Kelly, formerly of the AGO, who will be in charge of implementing this particular appropriation. And we're all on the same page that Commerce will simply interagency transfer funds to Oakland OPD once we have developed our investment plans and they've been approved. In addition, I have not tracked this down, but Jorge Barron, who is not here, I guess, advises that there is a chunk of new money for immigration assistance to Afghan refugees. And we also received, or Commerce also received $7.5 million to close a a large hole in services to victims of crime, of which we're a part of that. And we helped work with the team over in the DV and the SA communities to ensure that this passed and was included in the final budget, even though it had not been included in the governor's budget. That was successful. So we will not have VOCA cuts this year on the civil legal aid side or in any of the other programs that were funded there. Beyond that, I did send out a memo. Today's the 11th, I guess it was yesterday, around 8:30 in the morning, outlining from the OCLA perspective how the fiscal stuff affected us.
All right. Thank you, Jim, and thank you, Antonio. Any question for Antonio and Jim? All right. Okay, we thank you so much. We appreciate that. SP, we're going to have the liaison report, both for Judicial Administration and BJA Public Trust and Confidence Committee report.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much, Francis. I represent the ATJ Board as a liaison to the Board of Judicial Administration. And I'll have to be honest with you, at first, I wasn't even quite sure what that meant, not being an attorney, but I have learned a lot. And I think that Chief Justice Gonzalez said it very well when he stated in his welcoming letter of the BJA member guide that together we are charged with accomplishing the vision of the BJA to be a unified voice of the Washington State courts. Many of you know what the BJA is, maybe some people don't, but it's a body that represents 400 elected appointed judges throughout the state. It's a 15-member board that meets monthly, and it's co-chaired by Chief Justice Gonzalez and Snohomish County District Court Judge Tambui. The BJA focuses on several things, or has been for the last couple of years, and one is having to do with COVID. Created a court recovery task force that develops and implements strategies to ensure that every court can provide fair, timely, and accessible justice. Huge, huge effort trying to do that, and providing recommendations for our ongoing court operations. The other is to advocate for consistent funding that is not fee-based. And we have been in those kind of discussions here in this body, and some of you in other committees or groups that you're part of. Also working through the Court Security Task Force to assess the current court security needs, and developing strategies to ensure that every court in Washington complies with GR 36. There are 4 standing committees for this board: the Budget and Funding Committee, the Court Education Committee, the Legislative Committee, the Policy and Planning Committee, and there is a subcommittee to the Policy and Planning, the Public Trust and Confidence Committee. And I'll say a little bit more about that after I'm done with the BJA. To help carry out the work of this board, the board encourages or has resolutions that they've passed. Some of those are the adequate and sustainable funding for court education, the BJA Court Security Resolution, and the Language Access and Service Resolution. They also developed a legislative communications toolkit that was updated for this legislative session that can be used to help organizations as they're engaging with policy members during the legislative session. During the monthly meetings, there are presentations from outside committees and organizations such as JISC, OCLA, the Washington State Association of Counties, and others. In the last meeting that we had, it actually was the first meeting of the year, February 18th, the Policy and Planning Committee shared a survey they conducted asking how do courts prepare budget requests to address funding priorities. And as we can guess, there were more responses for urban area courts than rural. Kind of speaks to what we were talking about earlier. The top 3 programs that received the bulk of responses to the question, what are courts' top program funding priorities, was therapeutic problem solving, language access and interpreters, and pretrial services. Grant writing and using data to track performances were the two areas where courts said that they can use the most help. Now, I'm really condensing a lot of information in a short period of time. So there's a lot more that happens. So I just kind of cherry picked some things. So forgive me, but you can go online to the Board of Judicial Administration website, and the minutes and all the notes are there. The Court Recovery Task Force last month reported on what access to the courts looks like in this new world, this hybrid world. And there some of the excerpts from the notes of the small groups, which we do in every meeting. We come together in small groups, listed that most successful tools or strategy to increase public access, Zoom hearings, although recognizing that not everybody has access to technology. The other was e-filing. Now, the biggest need to accessing court services, again, is unequal access to Zoom platforms. So it's kind of, anyway, and reading, one of the other challenges is having to read large documents on a small device. And some people are using their phones to do Zoom, and they don't have a laptop, so they're using Zoom phones. I did that one time. I won't do it again. And then differences in jurisdictions, the need for a more unified communication strategy that has come up in the ATJ board meetings and in other meetings I'm sure that you've been part of. The Court Security Task Force, the last time they met was in December to check in on assignments that committees had. They updated the stakeholder contact list and discussed the communication campaign materials that were posted to the legislative toolkit before the start of the session. They focused on legislation with potential impacts on court security officers and developed a one-page summary of court security incidences that's posted on the BJA Court Security Force Task website, if anybody's interested in looking at that. The Budget and Funding Committee reported that it's time to develop our branch's biennial request. We know that we just got done with this session, but the time has come. And Chief Justice Gonzalez stressed that the process will be transparent and inclusive. There'll be a step-by-step calendar. There is a step-by-step calendar that was provided along with some concept paper models or ideas. So if anyone wants to submit a concept paper, these are all due April 1st, which is when I looked at what's involved in putting together a concept paper, that's a short timeline. So if anybody's interested in that, you might want to take a look at what's involved in getting that done. And some of you probably already have done that. Some highlights from the Court Education Committee are the Judicial College was held virtually. It'll be virtually again this year. Let's see. The committee submitted proposal changes to GR 26 requesting the rule be modified to include the requirement for judicial officers to receive diversity, equity, and inclusion credits. And the Supreme Court Rules Committee reviewed the proposed changes, and they're now out for comment until April 2022. The committee also adopted diversity, equity, and inclusion guidelines and disseminated the guidelines to the Education Committee for input. As mentioned before, most of the spring programs will be virtual this year. They continue to review the strategic plan with the intent to develop an updated strategic plan for this committee. And let's see, the Legislative Committee. You heard some of the reports just a minute ago of the good, the bad, and the ugly. And there are bills that the BGA was supporting or had that did pass, and I think one that didn't. And let's see, what else can I say about this? I'm trying to make sure I don't go over, so bear with me.
Good.
Yeah.
I think you've done justice to this issue.
So the public trust and confidence, I just wanted to say something about that. The public trust and confidence is a subcommittee of the planning committee. And currently that committee is working on updating the vision and mission and a strategic plan implementing the process and the work to do a strategic plan. There's work around the racial justice initiative, and in the different committees or work groups that make up the public trust. And the gist of it is how do we achieve the highest possible level of public trust and confidence in the Washington state judicial system, which is a very high bar to meet. And there's a lot of innovative ideas that come out of that meeting, but it's a very challenging area. And, you know, the group that's doing it is very committed. I think that's it, Francis. I will
Thank
open
you,
it up if
SP.
anybody has questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Any question for SP? Okay, we will transition to Terry for BJA COVID Response Committee.
Thank you, Francis, and thank you, SB, for throwing the softball for me to hit. So I have been covering for the last, I guess, 18 months. The BJA was called the Court Recovery Task Force, and it was an incredible opportunity to, particularly at the beginning of the pandemic, for the courts. They issued a number of emergency orders, and this was a way for the courts, much different than the Washington AOC has done in the past, to get actual user experience incorporated into how do we address the pandemic, because when the courts closed down, there were numerous access to justice issues, civil, criminal, family, youth, juvenile. So it's been, but now it's kind of tapered off, and I believe that there's only one more meeting in May. The bulk of the emergency orders, or not the bulk, but the things that were important in the emergency orders have been translated into proposed rules or adopted court rules. And so things like remote hearings, remote trials, remote jury selection, stuff like that has now moved into the court process for developing a rule. I was the chair of the Family Law Subcommittee, and we developed a proposed rule. Thank you, shout out to Dennis Cronin, who did the bulk of the work, for an informal domestic relations trial rule, so that people who are self-represented or unrepresented litigants can have a simpler divorce, and a judicial officer who can be more interactive than the usual judicial officer stance. So, and that is in process someplace. The where I'll just own this for me, where I think they fell short. There were two opportunities that didn't get addressed on the that I referenced for Court Recovery Task Force 2.0 would be great. The first is, and we've talked about it before here, Washington's fragmentation of the superior courts. That this would have been an opportunity for some of that fragmentation, particularly around the different technologies that the courts are using. 20 are on Odyssey, King and Pierce are on their own systems. The rest are on whatever they bought on the shelf. This would have been an opportunity to try to combine that, and so that for the state, we could have one login and one password, and people wouldn't have to learn logins and passwords by county and county. So, and not to mention data sharing agreements that, if data gets lost. So that would have been an opportunity. That was on a grand scale. That did not happen. Hopefully that will happen in the future. The other opportunity that frankly never got addressed or never got traction was GR 17, I believe, is about facsimiles. There is no GR rule about scanned documents. And with the courts being online, people scanning documents all the time, I believe the court should have a rule about, the standards for scanned documents and how they're processed. And the one thing that did happen and hopefully won't go away is that under GR 30, been a long time since I looked at the rule numbers, the self-represented litigants didn't have to supply a wet signature. They could do the /s/ like attorneys and triple LTs. And that was a huge thing, or they could use DocuSign. But it was a huge thing when the courts were closed, people couldn't get the wet signatures into files. And so the courts were willing to have a pause on that. And hopefully that will become more incorporated into court practice, that people don't have to show up. If you don't have representation, you can't afford representation, then you unfortunately are going to have to go to the court and give a wet signature. And that's just, that would be a terrible outcome of this. So that's.
Thank you, Terry. Any question for Terry? Yes, Church, go ahead.
Sorry, I'll make it quick. Terry, did you say that courts are not requiring wet signatures? Because we have courts that are still requiring them.
No, that was county by county, because even when
Okay.
the emergency orders went into effect that they wouldn't require a wet signature, we heard many stories about some county clerks were still requiring people to come in with a wet
Okay,
signature.
because that's just my dream, and I thought I was.
I'm with you. I'm totally with you on that.
Thanks.
We hope that dream will become a reality one day. Thank you, Church. Anyone else? I think Will is here now. Sad to say that Will is going to be doing EJC report, and this will be the last time Will will be doing this, because Will is transitioning to another job. We're all going to miss you, Will. We love you and appreciate all the work you have done in this community. You will forever remain in our hearts. So over to you, Will.
Thank you, Francis. Yeah, I'm gonna really miss working with everybody. Like you said, I'm transitioning away to a new job doing communications and advocacy for the Seattle Public Library Foundation, which I'm excited about, but also am disappointed to be leaving, and will really miss working with all of you a lot. Today is actually my last day, so I want to talk a little bit about the Ejc transition. We have our chair, Kara Masters, here, who is ably going to steer the ship for the rest of her term, but particularly these next few weeks while the Ejc replaces the staffer. That job announcement did go out this week, and definitely encourage you to share it with your networks. Caitlin, I don't know if you want to talk at all about that process.
Oh, right now?
Yeah, sorry, not to put you on the spot, but.
Absolutely. We posted the job announcement widely at the beginning of the week. We're giving preference to applications that are received before the end of the month. So please share the announcement with your colleagues and your networks. And if anyone at this meeting, knows someone who would be a good candidate for the role, let me know. Anyway, it's wide open, and we're very sad to see Will go after 3.5 years of working with the EJC, but we've had such great luck in finding great candidates for this position. So.
Yeah, it's a really, really fun job, and I'm sure that the next person will enjoy it as much as I did. I think the most fun part is working with all of you in the wider network of the Alliance. That's been so great, and I'm, like I said at the stakeholder meeting yesterday, I'm bummed the last 2 years of that have been mostly on Zoom, but hopefully the next person gets to experience the in-person work a little more. The other thing I wanted to say is that we did have our a stakeholder meeting yesterday to talk a little bit about the end of the supplemental session that Jim and Antonio have already kind of covered, and then to look forward to what is really the EJC's focus, which is the biennial budget coming up next year. And just wanted to say, maybe Kara can say a little bit more about this, that I think a big priority for the EJC and stakeholders this coming year is talking about how the funding needs that programs are seeing are really based on what they're hearing from their communities that they serve, the impacted communities, and using that community-informed lens to talk about the work that they're already doing to meet those needs, and then how some of the, fairly critical funding shortfalls, frankly, relate to those needs that the community is seeing. So I really hope that the budget development process that Jim has outlined in his memo from last week, as that moves forward, that stakeholders in the EJC are able to help out with that and take those needs into account, and that those concerns are taken seriously by sort of this whole community, and that I hope the ATJ board stays involved in that effort a lot. It's been really helpful to have ATJ board participation and listening to those stakeholder concerns over the past few years. So that's the last thing I'll say. I hope that I'll stay in touch with some of you. I'm actually looking into the possibility of joining a program board, and I'll share my personal email again in the chat so that we can stay in touch. So I hope this isn't the last time that we all see each other for a while. I hope it's sooner rather than later. So Kara, do you want to add anything to that?
I don't actually. I think we'll capture the gist of the meeting that we had yesterday, and I already shared my email in the chat. So if anybody has any issues or EJC related items that they want to contact me with, they can get in touch. And Will, I'm going to miss you personally. I've enjoyed working with you. So good luck with the new job.
Very much same. Thanks, Kara.
Thank you. Any questions for Will? Any last questions for Will? All right, thank you, Will. We wish you all the best. So let's go to Cesar for federal funding reports.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Thank you, Francis. Actually, before I talk about the federal funding update, I just wanted to a quick announcement of sorts. Well, not an announcement per se, but I know we talked a little bit. I mentioned it here, and I talked a little bit at DISCO, and currently in the DISCO undocumented services, client services subcommittee. NJP's board of directors formally approved NJP's establishment of a subsidiary, an LLC, that would allow NJP to provide services to use state funds to provide services for individuals regardless of status. Post that being done, I've connected, well, part of the undocumented client community services group, and we've agreed to launch an effort that will involve community members in helping and providing input to NJP on what that might look like, and the extent or scope of NJP's efforts in that area. So I'm really excited that we finally got around to that. It took a little while with all of the stuff going on last year, but it's an important step to make sure that we can use state funds as broadly as possible. We'll be sure that the undocumented group will be doing its work and also feeding information to the Delivery Systems Committee, and we'll be back with updates and information on that point. So as far as the federal budget is concerned, as I'm sure you've all heard in the news, a massive bill was finally agreed upon and is on its way to being passed in Congress. I believe the action in the Senate is scheduled for March 15th. The last continuing resolution, which we're literally are 6 months into the calendar year, into the fiscal year rather, and Congress is just getting around to finally putting together a budget. The funding available for Federal Legal Services Corporation is $489 million this year, and that represents about a 5% increase that Congress has provided for Legal Services Corporation. The problem with that is that I won't go all the way back to the beginning of the Biden administration when LSC and NLADA were asking for $1 billion for LSC. But we were very pleased as the budget's bills progressed that in fact the House had proposed $600 million for LSC, and the Senate proposed $515 million for LSC. So these were actually quite good numbers to see, and I think folks both at LSC and other program directors around the country were very pleased that we could reasonably project that the final number would be somewhere between 515 and 600. So folks have been quite surprised by the fact that not only did we not meet the floor of the proposed budget bills, but in fact the 489 million increase represents roughly half of what the Senate low number was. The practical implications of that, so that translates for JP purposes for an increase of about $325,000. The practical effect or impact of this is that based on the historic budget processes and so on, we were conservatively expecting an increase from LSC of $1.5 million. And as is the way of dealing with the federal government, we basically had included that number in our budget. And to find out this late into the year that in fact we're getting 325, not 1.5, is going to cause some significant challenges for us as we need to balance our budget. Not to get too mysterious about it, we're going to be having to reduce our footprint to some degree to try to incorporate that loss of expected and projected funding. And of course, we're in the process of we're beginning that process in earnest, examining the different options as well, and looking for alternatives and so on. But and the reduction to us, as I think I mentioned, was 1.875 million. That includes not only the projected revenue that didn't come in, but also increases and our collective bargaining and pay raises and so on and so forth. So that's where the number is at that level. So we're going to be facing some challenges, and also looking for creative opportunities, and there's all kinds of time lag issues here with possible state funding opportunities that are being created that might come around in July and so on. So we will be we'll be busy on that piece. Let's just say that. That's all I have on the federal funding situation.
Thank you, Cesar. Any comments, questions for Cesar? All right, we move right along to state funding. Jim, anything else need to be covered?
Just want to make sure everybody saw the memo that we sent out on the 10th outlining all of the funding issues that affect the Office of Civil Legal Aid. What I didn't talk about earlier were any of the eviction related funding requests or some new things that have come in, including a couple of program initiatives that we did not request. But we told the legislature that if they fund them, we will figure out a way to make them work. One includes a hotline, which will likely be over a KCBA for kinship care providers to call attorneys and get some assistance. Another one is a dedicated pot of money to be used exclusively for DV-related civil legal assistance. And we're still in conversations with the bill's sponsor to gain a sense of precisely what her thoughts are on that. It wasn't a bill, it was a proviso. But if you don't have a copy of that memo, I did send it out fairly widely. Just let me know, and I'll shoot it off to you. Diana, you've got it as well, right? Yeah.
Do you want to just post that in the chat, Jim?
The memo?
Yeah, just, I mean, I think it's really good. I think it's a really good snapshot of where we're at and what happened, just in case not everyone saw it.
Thank you. While Jim is doing that, over
Somebody
to
will
you,
have to tell
Caitlin.
me how to do that. I don't post things into the, I don't. you know.
Diana, if you have it, you can just post it in chat.
Well, I only have it as a PDF. It's not a link, so I don't know how you.
Yeah, and I don't have a link that I can send people because it's in our private box.
Sorry, I wasn't trying to give you a technology quiz on the
Thank
slide.
you. Yep.
Okay. All right. Caitlin, over to you. LFW reports.
Absolutely. I'm sorry I missed a meeting with you in February, but as you know, it was our 36th annual Goldmark lunch, which Natalia will report on in more detail. I think that's over. I think the big thing that the Legal Foundation is focused on right now are funding opportunities, especially given, the great areas of need and some of the strategic opportunities that we see moving forward. I think one of the biggest opportunities is the prospect of increased interest rates on IOLTA. If you're a real geek, maybe you've followed the Federal Reserve over the last few months, and they're projecting 5 or 6 different, staggered rate increases over the next year, probably in the amount of 1/4 of a basis point, which means 0.25 of 1%. It's not a lot of money by itself, but in the fullness of a year's time, it will make quite a difference in funding available for civil legal aid, probably beginning next year. And so one of our challenges and opportunities internally is just making sure we have a plan, an infrastructure, and the ability to shake those banks down as soon as possible when rates go up. Just because the Federal Reserve raises their interest rates doesn't follow necessarily in quick translation that banks increase the rates that they pay their customers. IOLTA customers are not. But like I said, we've got a strategy in the works to make it happen as soon as possible. And so I see that as a glimmer of hope on the horizon, and I will keep you up to date as we progress through the year and the yet to be seen but widely expected interest rate environment goes up. Other things we've been working on at LFW, King County funding. We're poised to sign a contract with them as soon as it's available. We put out an RFP at the end of in January, and we received $4 million in funding requests for about what we think is going to be $1.9 million to give out. And again, there just have been some timing challenges with the county and a couple of substantive things early on that got worked out. But it's definitely in play, and we hope to start rolling out that money again as soon as the contract is signed and hopefully in the next month. We've just added 2 new panelists to our Race Equity Grants Advisory Panel. They're replacing others who are terming out. Not quite ready to announce them yet, but that's a precursor to our next round of race equity grants, which have been expanded to be 2-year grants instead of just 1 year, because we believe the longer commitment you make to organizations, the better they're able to serve clients. So just putting that in place. And I think those are the 3 real highlights, other than the fundraising developments that Natalia will share. I just wanted to say I really appreciated Anthony's comments, or excuse me, Antonio's comments earlier in the meeting about how the state is considering stipends. It's an active topic of conversation at the legal foundation of how do we pay people with lived experience when they contribute to our decision-making processes. I spoke with Terry Price last month about it, and I just think it's a really key area of equity for those of us doing this work, you know, in terms of bringing community in. So that's the end of the legal foundation report. And
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Kathleen. Natalia, over to you, Campaign for Equal Justice.
Thank you, Francis. Thank you, Caitlin. Hi, everyone. I'm Natalia Fiore, Annual Campaign Director for Campaign for Equal Justice. And I wanted to give a shout out to Will. Thank you so much for all your work. I will miss working with you. You've done a lot of great work with us and helped elevate our comms game too at LFW. So thank you. And I have to give a shout out to Cesar because 25 years at NJP, you got a snazzy background. So congrats, that's super cool. So
it's actually the tail end of NJP's 25-year anniversary.
It's very cool.
Not me at NJP.
No, I didn't think so.
Oh, sorry, my mistake.
So yes, Caitlin touched on our Goldmark event. Thank you to everyone who joined us. We raised almost $450,000, which is the highest we've ever raised at a Goldmark event. We really, really hope to be back in person next year. So we're already making plans with the Westin in Seattle, and whatever we end up doing, it'll be a hybrid so that it's accessible to anyone. But we really hope we can get, 500 people or so back in the ballroom and just be in community again with each other. So looking forward to that. This year, we were very excited to honor Annie Lee with the Goldmark Award. I think many of you were there, but I'll drop the link in here, which is the full recording of the event. If you'd like to watch it, if you weren't there, check it out. The keynote is by Dr. Ben Danielson, who's always inspiring. So there's that for you. Overall, in 2021, the campaign raised $2 million, a little over $2 million. So thank you to everyone on this call for your help, to all the legal aid providers for all of your amazing work. That's what we raise the money for. And we love to cheerlead you and promote your work so that donors feel inspired to give to us. So we all work very well together to help us raise money. So thank you. We are ramping up our Beer and Justice events again this year and are planning to do in-person events finally again. So looking forward to that. We're going to do probably 8 of them across the year. Seattle Beer and Justice we're bringing back. We'll have Spokane, Yakima, Bellingham, Vancouver, Everett, Olympia, and I think one possibly down in Cowlitz and Wahkiakum counties somewhere. So still working on a location with them. So that's going to be a lot of fun. Stewardship is a big goal for the campaign this year, just thanking our donors, thanking everyone, making sure you all know how appreciative we are of the work that you do for us, from our board members to our law firms to our individual donors. Thank you. We can't raise $2 million without all of us. And that, of course, is our goal again this year. So we're already prepping for our 4th annual associates campaign this fall, which is a really fun effort. We had 12 firms join us in our 3rd year. We hope to add a few more firms this year. That takes place 2 weeks during the last month of October, and all of the associates from those firms kind of try to raise the most money, compete for a few fun awards. So if any of y'all are part of a law firm that is not joining us yet, we'd love to have you. And then, of course, prepping for our biggest effort every year, which is our law firm campaign that we do in King and Pierce counties. So again, thank you to everyone here who represents a firm that donates to us. We really appreciate your support. Masters Law, GTH, just shout out a few I see on the call here today. So thank you all for that. And that concludes the campaign update. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Natalia. I'm sorry, I'm on mute. Any question for Natalia on Campaign for Equal Justice? Any question, comments?
I see Lindy's question in the chat. We would love to have Spokane be part of the law firm campaign. We have toyed with the idea in the past. We also have thought about Snohomish County doing something similar. It honestly comes down to a bandwidth issue, to be honest. A lot of it can be board led, but without some leadership in those areas, it's pretty hard, we've found, for it to get going, because it's not that we haven't tried. So thank you for reminding me of Spokane, Lindy, because there are so many great supporters in Spokane. So again, it's just a matter of us revving up the right people. So if you want to help out, I'm all ears.
Thanks, Lindy. Thanks, Lindy. I get your message.
Hi, Francis.
However, that I have keynote speak at more beer and wine all over the state than any other person other than Sal, because I've done Yakima, I've done Bellingham. So Terry, you better be ready for beer and wine campaign. I love going to it. It's always fun to get to go across the state to raise funds for civil legal aid. I enjoyed it. It's one of the highlights of my career. Thank you so much, Natalia. Okay, now we're going to go to Dean Porter and to introduce Dean Terry Price.
Thank you, Francis, and welcome to our guest speaker. I am honored and privileged to welcome the Tony Remby Interim Dean and UW Law Professor Elizabeth Liz Porter. I have a lot of notes here, but time is getting short, and it is a daunting task to welcome her and to condense her history. She has impeccable educational credentials that she would never lead off with. Her scholarship is in civil procedure and civil litigation. But in my experience of her, she often harkens back to being a high school teacher, both in Germany, and I now know that she was in the Boston public schools, and a lot of her concerns and her warmth about teaching come from, I think, those experiences. She's a 5-time winner from Law Students Teacher of the Year, and then a University Distinguished Teacher of the Year in 2014. She was our Associate Dean for Academic Administration through the pandemic, as well as now being the Interim Dean, and she has been on the forefront of teaching in all of its manifestations, all online, back in person, vaxxed and masked, back in person, no mask, and wants to have a thoughtful, apropos to our previous conversation, wants to have a thoughtful conversation about incorporating technology in the future in the classroom. She's been a terrific supporter of our diversity, equity, inclusion, multiculturalism mission, and she was the driving force behind our first transgender rights seminar that we held this quarter. And lastly, how could I forget? By the way, she was a judicial extern for the Honorable Sonia Sotomayor in the Second Circuit Court of Appeals. And oh yeah, she was a law clerk to U.S. Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. So I am very pleased to welcome my colleague, my boss, and my friend, Liz Porter.
Thank you very much, Terry. And it's great to see both you and Anna on this call. I'm a bit daunted by many faces that I have not yet had the opportunity to meet in person. Thank you. I'm very honored to be here. I wasn't sure exactly what would interest you most, so I thought I would just give you an update of what's going on in the law school from my perspective, and then take questions. And I can tell you a little bit about kind of, also my goals for this period while I am temporarily the steward of our law school community. And Terry and Anna can feel free to pipe up in the chat or just out loud if I'm missing something or misdescribing anything. So first, I just want to say that I think I hate to use this word, but we're beginning to think of ourselves as in the recovery mode from the pandemic. I'm afraid to say that because I'm afraid like the Balrog, it will just come back and grab us and pull us into the abyss. But right now we're trying to think a little bit optimistically as rates are low. We've been back in the building. This is a really huge thing for our students, particularly for students who started their law school experience during the pandemic. So this year's 2 Ls, last year's 1 Ls. I think it was really difficult for us last year to capture the many ways that they suffered from having to begin that very intense process without the glue of an in-person social network to support them as they did so. We're looking to find small ways in our community to promote healing and joy. This is an ongoing process, and it seems daunting, and at the same time, it's remarkable how even small things make a difference. So now we have like pop-up coffee on the first floor once a week, or multiple times a week, and that these things seem like very tiny things, but it's a time for people to be able to come together and have informal conversations. And what's been remarkable is that the students are like, "So are you just giving me coffee? I don't have to do anything. I could just talk to someone." And so things like that, goofy things like a roller skating party for our affinity groups. The Dean for Students and we have a new thing to just hand out sheet cakes to events with goofy pictures on them. We also, however, I want to emphasize that our students are still feeling the cascading effects of the pandemic. We have a student emergency support fund, and we are still dispersing funds for our students for basic things such as rent, such as groceries. We do have students who have very difficult personal circumstances, and the pandemic has, of course, exacerbated all of those difficulties. And that is an ongoing commitment for us, and it's an ongoing issue. We're still getting, I think we've gotten probably 30 requests over the past few weeks. So it is not trivial. Our average disbursement is about $150 per event, which is not necessarily per person. Positive updates. We have a new 1L Critical Perspective speaker series, which has been a huge part of our community this year. It's key to the 1L curriculum. So we have somebody come in and talk from a critical perspective about property law, someone from torts, et cetera, et cetera. I think it's been transformative for the 1L class. That is on Zoom. It's one of the many ways that actually technology is making our education and our lives better. It's enriching as opposed to draining. That's been fantastic. We're also in the process of curricular reform to introduce more seminars discussing legal questions from critical perspectives, from various critical perspectives. And as Terry said, this is part of an ongoing effort to diversify our curriculum. It's particularly difficult to make any changes in the 1L curriculum that tends to be sticky. We have students from the immigration clinic will be going to the border, the US-Mexico border during spring break for an in-person trip to help people who are seeking asylum. And this is huge for us to be able to kind of go back to some semblance of normalcy. We did this before the pandemic. So this is also a sign of healing. We have 2 new hires this year. We're hiring a new director for our Native American Law Center, as well as a business organizations hire. Both of these candidates are truly interesting people. And Monty Mills, the candidate for the Native American Law Center hire, visited the law school last week. And we use it as an opportunity to meet with our Native American Law Center alumni, to meet with Leonard Forsman, Chairman Forsman. He's the chairman of the Squamish tribe. He's currently also a regent at the University of Washington, to connect with Native scholars and students on campus, across campus, outside the law school, and of course, to have meetings within the law school. And that's a really interdisciplinary, historically and currently and futurely significant part of the law school, in which we have great hopes for Monty to carry on the amazing tradition of Bob Anderson, who's now Deputy Attorney General at the Department of the Interior. We have Admitted Students Day, April 1st. That's also the weekend for our Gates Public Law Service Scholarship interviews. As we winnow down the candidates, it's been an incredibly strong pool this year. Applications in general are up. We admitted our most diverse class ever last year after doing some, maybe not quite as well as all of you. I'm hearing about the Goldmark Luncheon, but some strongly better fundraising for scholarships, which is a factor for us in admitting the class that we want to admit. We also have, in case you're interested, maybe again, I don't know if we have the same aspirations that the Goldmark Lunch does, but we have a PILA virtual auction on April 8th, and we welcome you to come and join and support students who are wanting to do internships, summer internships, on their route to pursuing jobs in public interest. I think that's it for major things. I should say, I don't really have any idea how long I'll be the interim dean. My goal, while I am interim dean, my primary goal is care and feeding of the community. That's actually what I spend most of my time doing. I'm still teaching because that's important to me. I co-direct also the Ninth Circuit Appellate Advocacy Pro Bono Clinic. So our students just put in their reply brief. We have oral argument in Portland in May for pro bono case. It's just 2 students. We do 1 case. But one of the things that's just been missing in the law school is just any kind of interpersonal connection. Many people feel unseen. I'm sure this is true in your communities. This is true all across campus. It's not unique to the law school. And we're trying to bring people back to the building, but also just make personal connections through thank you notes, through email, through calling people up, through seeing people in the halls, through meeting them for coffee. And I know that sounds maybe kind of low level, but I actually think it might be my highest and best commitment to the law school as dean. We're of course pursuing a 3-year hiring plan. We're working on our budget. We're working with donors to kind of advance our mission. I would like our advancement mission to be more overtly anti-racist and to make connections with alums of color from the past years. I think many people came to the law schools, years ago, were very alienated while they were here, and we should be working to heal those rifts. There are many things going on in the law school, and that is itself a form of care and feeding. So these are the things that I am most dedicated to for the time that I am here. I welcome your thoughts, your support, your comments, your questions, and I am the dean, so you can also just criticize. I'm fine with that too. I'm good.
Thank you. Thank you, Dean Porter. We appreciate you and appreciate you coming in here today to give us an idea of where you're going with the program. Thank you so very much. Any questions or comment or clarification, request for clarification? SP, go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much, Dean Porter. I just wanted to thank you for all that information. And I wanted to say that the work that you're doing that you just mentioned towards the end in terms of repairing those rifts with alumni of color, that's also an opportunity to ask them, what do they think needs to be done differently? And I think it's a great opportunity whenever you are open to kind of mending those bridges that have been somewhat damaged, right? Still can repair them. Look at what they're doing with the West Seattle Bridge. So yeah.
I think we should aim for higher than that.
Yeah.
but thank you. And I think it's a long and ongoing process. And in a way, it's just a different way of thinking about alumni engagement, right? Of not only thinking of who will give us money, but of defining our community through time and space. Yep. And that is I think could be a quite healing process for some people. I have to be candid and say, I'm not sure everybody will be open yet to that healing process. And that's something that we have to be respectful of.
Mm-hmm. And there might be an opportunity to learn what can be learned to better recruit, right? Other folks, to entice them to come to the law school there. So
I forgot to tell you about one thing that you might be interested in. So I apologize, this is orthogonal to this conversation, but we are in April hosting a quite big symposium virtually. It'll be the unveiling of the first restatement of the law of American Indians. And it's for us, this would have been our marquee event in person, and we were hoping by April we could do it in person, but the planning was just too tight. So there's information about it on the law school's website. I'm also happy to send somebody information. Terry can give you the link. But this is a momentous process. It's been the result of many years of work by Native scholars and judges. And we're very lucky at the University of Washington to be able to host this sort of birthing of the American Law Institute statements. And the reason why it hooks to this earlier conversation is that I would like us to have an annual day where we have an open house where friends of the Native American Law Center can return to the law school to see us, but also to see them. We have people who graduate, who participate in our tribal clinics, who have worked with Bob Anderson. We have people in these practices all over the state, all over the region. And those alums often have relationships with each other, but they are not necessarily anchored to the law school. And I think that's a missed opportunity for us, and it's a missed opportunity for them. So that's just one example of ways that don't have to be life-altering, and yet could be life-altering.
Thank you. Thank you so much. We appreciate that's good information. I think we'll work with Terry to see how ATJ Board can assist in that effort. Lily, go ahead.
Thank you, Dean Porter, for sharing all of that great information. I know we're running short on time, but I just wanted to thank University of Washington School of Law for their partnerships with Seattle University School of Law. That includes the Heritage Pipeline Project. And I know we just had our Diversity Week and UW also had theirs. And I have been conversing with, I believe, Lisa Castilleja, and she has been strongly supporting our programs here. And we also support the programs that are taking place at UW. And I just wanted to give a quick shout out to PILA that is coming up at University of Washington, because we recently had our PILF auction and we had UW students come over and support our program. So I encourage everyone to also support the auction for public interest summer internships at University of Washington.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lily. I just wanted to say that we also benefit not only from all of these informal exchanges, but our students cross-register for clinics. This is super important for us. So we have UW students at the Seattle U Workers' Rights Clinics and at the Seattle U Nonprofit Organization Clinics. And, we are really a fairly small legal community, a unified legal community in so many ways. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, everyone. Other announcement, the fourth Monday of every month is a disco meeting between 12 to 1:30 p.m. Next meeting is going to be March 28th. Technology Committee is third Tuesday of every other month, 12 p.m. to 1:30 p.m. Next meeting is April 19. The Rules Committee of the ATJ Board meets third Tuesday of every other month at 12 p.m. to 1 p.m. Next meeting is March 15. The next meeting of this board is going to be on April 1st. Thank you so much for coming and have a good rest of the day. Bye, everyone.
Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.